Hey y'all, it's Caitlin, and today I am going to be showing you guys how I make these Funko Pop resin magnets. This is just something I've been doing as a hobby recently. I'm really into it, and you gotta admit, they look freaking adorable. So here are most of the ones I've done so far, minus the ones I've given to friends. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to make the circular ones, but as you can see, I do have different shapes. I have smaller hearts, larger hearts. And keep all the ones you're seeing in mind because these are going to be featured in future giveaways or ones like these. I'm going to let the winner of future giveaways tell me what pop they want and what shape they want, and I will make them a resin magnet. Ignore my phone going off if you can see it. This one's kind of my favorite. I don't usually go that detailed for them, but that one's my favorite. Anyway, let's get on to the tutorial. So for these particular molds, this is the size of the pictures I use. About double the size of a quarter, about. So as you can see, off to the left, I already have some images already prepared, but I wanted to go ahead and just quickly show you guys how to cut it out. You can cut these out with scissors if you're super careful. I would recommend, if you want to try this, to get an X-Acto knife. They're way easier to use when cutting out small detail shapes that some pops have. And sometimes you still mess up when you use it. So scissors will just make it a lot more difficult. And definitely take your time and go around them and be careful. X-Acto knives don't look too dangerous, but trust me, they can be. Especially if you drop them and they roll off the table. Yeah, don't ask. Anyway, just be careful with them. Once you have the image fully cut out, now you have to laminate it. And I use just clear packing tape for this part. And this is to protect the image from the liquid of the resin. And obviously you want to make sure your tape is clean. My workspace is so cluttered and stuff that don't ask. Anyway, I'm saying don't ask a lot. But I just pretty much sandwich the image in between two pieces of tape. Now, if you don't want to waste tape, what you can do is get a piece of plastic, like a Ziploc or something, and take some Mod Podge or glue and paint the glue on top of it and let it dry and do a couple coats of it. I've used that method before and it worked just as well, so whichever one's more convenient for you. If you use this method with the tape, make sure to seal around the image with your fingers just to make sure that every little spot is sealed. You'll see later on that for one of the images I did not do that correctly. You'll see that later, but yeah, just make sure you have that little border that's around the image that you saw a while ago, and you want to make sure that as you're cutting it out with the scissors, you do not nick that border. If you do nick it, you can sometimes seal it with glue, and obviously you have to wait for the glue to dry. But even sometimes that's not foolproof. Again, you'll see that later on. So before we go any further, let's talk a little bit about the resin we're using. So this is the Sophie and Toffee brand. This is actually an online shop that's based in Singapore, so it takes a little while to get to you if you order from there, but I think it's the best. It's the easiest instructions to follow. They cure in about 12 hours, which is pretty fast. This stuff is easy cast. You can buy it at Hobby Lobby. It's a 2-part resin. This one is equal parts. The Sophie and Toffee is a 2-to-1 ratio. And this one cures in about 12 to 24 hours. This is UV resin. You do not want to use UV resin with the molds we're using. You have to use clear molds, like translucent molds, to use it. And it cures in sunlight and UV light. And finally, this is the one we're not using. This is white resin. It cures really fast, but it also cures pure white, so you wouldn't be able to see the image inside the resin piece. So, as I said, we're using the Sophie and Toffee brand. This is the brand that I ordered overseas. But Sophie and Toffee is a business that specializes in resin and clay crafting, so their own resin is honestly the best that I've ever used, because it says it right on the bottle. It cures pretty quickly when it comes to clear resin, and there is way less micro bubbles in it, which is just the air bubbles that come out of it. The only thing I don't like about it, they don't have the exact measurements right. So it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So I'm using a tablespoon and a half, so I need a tablespoon of the part A, half a tablespoon of part B. You always have more part B than you have A. You will always run out of A and you'll have more B to spare. I don't know why they have it like that, but they do. And it drives me absolutely nuts. So most people, when they're crafting with resin, they use recyclable or disposable cups and then popsicle sticks, so it's just easier to clean up, honestly. And if you do spill anything or use tools that you do have to clean off, like I'm using these measuring cups, or spoons rather, you have to use rubbing alcohol. Do not try to clean it up with water. It will not have a good result. Water just makes resin even more sticky. So yeah, definitely use rubbing alcohol. And you can see I'm wearing gloves. You're supposed to wear a mask too, because this stuff is toxic, and that's why a lot of people don't like to use it. But the fumes, I've never experienced them bothering me. The UV resin, even the non-toxic UV resin, has really bad fumes in it. So I use a mask when I'm working with that stuff, but I don't when I'm using the just regular epoxy resin. But I do use gloves just to keep the resin from getting on my hands and having to keep rubbing it off with rubbing alcohol. I'm sorry for the poor angle, guys. I know it's like not the best ever, but I'm doing my best with the space I got. Anyway, so with this stuff, you have to mix it pretty thoroughly. I mix for at least 2 minutes. When it starts to combine, it'll be pretty cloudy, kind of murky, and you want it to be pretty darn clear when you're pouring it in. It's going to be filled with micro bubbles. Do not even worry about that right now. You'll see how to take care of those in a minute. But yeah, make sure everything is thoroughly mixed. If not, your resin piece can turn out a lot stickier, a lot bendier, and you also have to make sure you're in a pretty room temperature environment. If it's too humid where you are, it could still end up being a lot stickier and bendier. As you're pouring it in, make sure the image is out of the mold. I just put them in there to make sure all the measurements were right. And also make sure your molds are pretty clean. I use a Q-tip and rubbing alcohol to get all the dust particles out. Now, as I said before, I made a tablespoon and a half worth of the resin mixture, and that only went far enough to make 3 of these things. So I had to double it up. This was my first time doing so many at once. I just wanted to make that many for a video. But yeah, just make sure you go a little bit at a time, spread it out pretty evenly, and make sure all of the bottom surface is covered. So as you can see, I went ahead and made the other batch off camera and filled the other molds in it. And as I was doing that, the micro bubbles came to the surface and all went into the middle. And here's how you get rid of those things. Take a barbecue lighter, light it, and lightly go over the surface. And you can see how the heat is popping all those micro bubbles. So this will just make the finished product look a lot more professional. You want to make sure you get all the micro bubbles that are still around the edges too, because those are going to be the ones that show up a lot more. Or get as many as you can. Sometimes it's kind of impossible. But yeah, they just make it look a lot more professional. You have little air bubbles in there to make it look kind of off, and you'll see later on how a micro bubble can make your piece look pretty bad if it's put in the wrong area. But yeah, that's how you get the majority of the micro bubbles out. So after all the micro bubbles are popped, or most of them, it's time to put your image into the resin. So I'm starting with Mystique here, and you want to make sure that the entire image is covered, or at least the majority of it. Why I am using a toothpick to do this, I don't know. It's way faster with a larger tool like a toothpick, or not a toothpick, a popsicle stick or something. And you can see me moving the piece around or trying to. That'll just help it stay more to the bottom. It will end up floating off up into the resin. And it's safe to push it back down a couple times to try and get it to stick to the bottom. But if you end up doing it too many times, especially after it gets a bit thicker, you risk putting more air bubbles in. And again, you're going to see the consequences of that later on in the video. But yeah. So I made Crypto, Mystique, Harley Quinn, He-Man, Deadpool, Bedtime Deadpool, and Tinkerbell for each of these magnets. I don't know if you can tell, but Tinkerbell kind of lost her wand as I was cutting her out, so yeah. You probably couldn't really tell, but yeah, if any of you could, yeah, I accidentally chopped it off. Anyway, so I got these little flower beads, and I cut the back of it off, and I put them around the Tinkerbell image, just to make it look a bit more, I don't know, springy. Spring reminds me of the Tinkerbell movie, the first Tinkerbell movie, so I always kind of associate spring with Tinkerbell now. And I wanted to show you guys that if you want anything that's going to be on the same level as your image, then you need to put it in with this stage. If you want something to be more in the back, you can put an extra clear layer behind it after it already hardens, after this layer hardens. I've never done that before, but I know you can. And you want to try to move it a little bit around, try to get any air bubbles that might be trapped in the curves of the beads out. But yeah, I think it turned out pretty good in the end. So for the colored backings, this is like a day later, by the way. I'm using the Hobby Lobby brand, just cause. You can make more of it at a time. Now, that's the brand. You see Harley looks a little bit different. You can see by the legs, I didn't really seal it all that well when I nicked the border when I was cutting her out. So I took it out of the mold just to see if the image was distorted. Yeah, that was a mistake. So now let's talk a little bit about what you can use to color the backings of the resin. What most people have is food coloring. Now, if you're using the opaque, the solid color resin, which you can use for the backing, don't use the food coloring because it sets off a chemical reaction that I can't explain. It looked like it just boiled over, and this happened within seconds of me stirring it up. Yeah, I don't know what happened to it, but it does make a really cool looking witch's cauldron if you want something to put in your Halloween decor. So I know my sculpting isn't too great, but that effect was really awesome. But you can use these resin colorants. This is specifically for UV resin, but you can use it for any type of epoxy resin as well. I bought it off Amazon in a pack of 12. Then you have these Pearl-X powders that gives it a pearly or glittery finish. And I bought these little bitty containers off Amazon for a pack of 24, and I haven't run out of any yet. But if you have one color that you feel like you're going to be using a lot, you can buy these gigantic jars of it at Hobby Lobby. And of course, you can use any special effects powder you have, such as glow-in-the-dark. I only have glow-in-the-dark powders. You can have color change powders as well that have a really cool effect to it. Then after you figure out what color, it's time to get fun with all the glitters and shimmers and add-ons and whatever you want. So obviously you can find glitter in just about any kind of shape or color. These are actually nail art glitters. A lot of people use nail art because of how small they are. They fit perfectly in resin pieces. You can also use beads. I've seen people use beads as the backings to their resin pieces. And you can also use food such as Halloween sprinkles you bought 4 years ago and totally forgot about them and found recently in the back of your cabinet. And even though you think they're pretty much indestructible, you're still scared to eat them. So, or M&Ms. Any of these like smaller candies will totally work with resin as long as you completely cover the candy with the resin. So you can see this little M&M gummy bear I made. And this Halloween magnet that I made with the sprinkles in the back. So yeah, just make sure it's all sealed and it's perfectly fine. So for the Harley, obviously when you're doing this, you want to separate the resin you just mixed up into little bitty portions, and it's better to make too little than too much, honestly, because then you have a bunch of excess resin that you have to have like a separate mold for if you want to just use it or just throw it away, you know. Anyway, so for Harley, the obvious colors to use are red and black, so I used red with black sparkles and black with red sparkles and made a dual color magnet with it. And again, this one doesn't turn out quite right, so it does look different than the end product you'll see later on, but I did use the epoxy colorants or the resin colorants for it instead of food coloring or anything. Now, you saw me use my glove to wipe some of the resin off. By the way, I made way too much black resin and ended up making two little bats out of it. But if you use gloves like me and you get resin on them, just change the glove. You can keep going, or you can wash the glove. But if you just keep going, every single thing you touch will be sticky. So just forewarn. I apologize again for the horrible angle and all this. But anyway, for He-Man, I used a mixture of the blue colorant and the Pearl-Ex powder. The colorant just made it a little bit darker, and the Pearl-Ex powder gave it a bit of a swirly, shiny, shimmery, galaxy-like effect to it without having to use a whole bunch of different colors. Looking back, I probably should have went a lot more crazier with Deadpool's, because that's one character that you can do just about anything with and it'll make sense. But I just used the pink colorant along with some pink colored glitter. Now, one thing about these colorants, though, it makes it really translucent. And sometimes I honestly kind of forget about that. If you want to make them look a little bit more opaque, you can add like a drop of white or black colorant into it, depending on whether you want it lighter or darker, because those two end up very, very opaque. All the rest of them are translucent. So I chose Mystique to be the lucky one to get glow-in-the-dark powder put into her magnet. I don't know why, looking back, I probably should have went with Tinkerbell, but oh well. I thought it looked cool anyway, so I just used yellow glow-in-the-dark powder and some silver triangle glitter just to have something else in the background. Now this one will feel a lot more grainy as you're mixing it up because the powder isn't very, it doesn't dissolve as well as the Pearl-Ex powder does. So just be aware of that. Make sure you mix it very, very thoroughly. For Crypto, I played with the colors that are on Superman's outfit. So I used the blue colorant along with gold and red sparkles all over it just to make it look a bit more shimmery, I guess. And also, you know, multicolor magnets like the Harley one, the more colors you use, the harder the effect is to pull off. So I didn't want to make like a tricolored magnet because honestly I was too lazy. So I just used the glitters to represent those other two colors. The Tinkerbell one I'm going to show you guys just me mixing it up rather than pouring it because honestly this is the one I was really disappointed with the way the colorant turned out on this one. So I'm using those heart-shaped nail art to as the glitter for this one. But as for the coloring itself, I only used some brand new colorant that I bought off of Sophie and Toffee, which is iridescent coloring. Now, I'm sure if you went ahead and mixed it with other colorants, it would look a lot better, but I didn't. I just put the straight iridescent coloring in, and when it hits the light, you can see it shining, but it's definitely not the effect I was going for. So yeah, not really too much to see with that one. So real quick, here's how they all look after I had poured the colored resin. You can barely see anything in Tinkerbell's. And it's better if you can get enough of it so it'll cover those beads too, but oh well. So the micro bubbles are back. So you get to get out your little friend again and push it about 3 times before it finally gets on. There you go. So, and you just do the exact same thing you did for the clear parlor resin, make sure to go over it and get any of the micro bubbles that you can see on the surface out, just to make it look cleaner and honestly prettier once it finally cures. 24 hours later, and the things are finally fully hardened and it's ready to come out of the mold. And I'm sorry for trying to do this one-handed. I'm trying to hold the phone so it's a bad angle. But the Harley one, you can see the colored resin actually spilled over because I took it out of the mold, so it wasn't completely sealed. So yeah, that kind of sucked. And the He-Man one, and of course these two would be the ones that I screwed up on. Well, you'll see that one in a minute. I forget I took the Mystique one out first. Mystique came out pretty good. It would have been better if it was an opaque background, like I said, but I just always forget to put the opaque backgrounds in them a lot. But the He-Man one, there's a big air bubble right by his eye, and I did not seal the image very well at the very top of his head. So you can see there's a little air bubble within the tape that I used, so I didn't press the tape in hard enough. Yeah, of course, those two would be the ones that I messed up, because those two were the ones going to friends. I'm pretty sure Homespun Geek will have a video where I unbox the final products of those two, which I made off camera to fix up. But you can see Crypto and Deadpool, and you can see they're pretty dull looking, and that's because the mold I was using was a matte finished mold. If you use a mold that has a glossier finish to it, it'll come out a lot glossier or shinier. If it don't, there is an extra step you have to take. And that extra step is UV resin. So UV resin, honestly, it cures just the same, or it looks just the same as the epoxy resin does. So a lot of people do use epoxy resin for glazing and making their pieces shinier. But again, you'll have to wait another day for that, and I just don't have the patience for that, so I use UV resin and a UV lamp. Now, if you do this, you want to use a fluffy, designated brush for it, and you will have to clean it out with alcohol again, like I said. Don't use water. And here's the thing with resin. It's really sticky. Even if you do keep cleaning these things up, your brush up with the alcohol, chances are the brush still won't be very suitable for paint again. So you will have to make sure it's a brush that you didn't pay a lot for. And just try to make it as even as possible. It's really hard to do without holding the magnet steady, as you can see with me holding the camera, but I managed. So y'all see me use this little flashlight in my Funko Pops. If you don't have a large lamp like I do, this is used for UV nail coloring, nail polish. I'm so girly, but that's what I use to cure these things as well. Again, sorry for the angle. This one has a feature on it where you can leave it for 30 minutes. That's the one I use. It takes a lot less than that, honestly, and you can see the little bat I made with the extra resin. But I'm just a worrywart, so I keep it in there longer. Use the suddenly completely different background, but anyway. So you just take a little bit of super glue and a pack of magnets that you can find at Walmart. I usually put the magnets on the back of the heads, especially when you have a translucent one. That way you can't see the magnet from the front of this thing, from the magnet, and there you go. Here is the redone He-Man and Harley Quinn. This is just a still photo, and I posted this one on my Instagram. The He-Man one I made the exact same way I made the one from the video. The Harley one, I used Pearl X powders instead of the colorants to make it more opaque. And I think it turned out a lot better. Obviously, I didn't mess with the molds or anything this time, and thankfully all the micro bubbles were pretty easy to deal with. And here is Mystique glowing in the dark. These things actually glow really, really well. Like if you just have it on your refrigerator and it just absorbs the lighting from your kitchen or whatever all day long, it glows for a pretty good time after all the lights have been turned out. So I bought the glow in the dark powder in a pack of 8 on Amazon, just so you know. And here is one final look of the other four that we made. I filmed this after I sent the other two off to Homespun Geek. So yeah, I hope you guys found this a little bit entertaining. I want to do like resin crafty. You can see how those flower beads are still sticking out of the resin. I should have made it thicker, but whatever. I'm hoping to have some of these custom crafty type videos at least once a month, so hopefully you guys find them at least somewhat entertaining. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Remember, it's a community, not a competition, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.